Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. It's 8:27 p.m. on the 5th of June, and as usual, time is just passing us by here, one day after another. And tonight we're going to continue our talk about the reality of imagination, and so we'll call this podcast the Reality of Imagination Part 2. Now, I think it's going over well. I think you're understanding what I'm saying. It's very important to understand imagination. And, a lot of times when I say consciousness, imagination is a significant percentage of what that word means. It's not 100% of it. Consciousness goes beyond imagination. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But the imagination and the way we fix and order our inner reality so that we can have an outer reality is really pivotal to how this game is played down here, and really pivotal to how we are, in a sense, corralled or controlled. It's not all negative per se, it's just that a significant portion of it is. The more I think about it, it's hard to say that government has any benign purpose. Its entire reason for existing now is just extremely derogatory and dictatorial, and I think that we're on the cusp of something very, very dark. I don't know how long it will last. I don't think long. I don't think longer than a decade. I think their greatest weakness is revealing themselves as autocrats and giving up the illusion that there's ever been anything called democracy or cooperative government. And I think that the moment they give that up, they're finished. But then the secondary problem becomes, how do we organize to scale? Okay, organizing to scale is a huge human problem. Remember what I said, I think it was the last podcast, about how the 20th century was really all about social organizations, of which there were three. There was communism, capitalism, and fascism. And democratic socialism is a blend of communism and capitalism. And I think democratic socialism is the very worst outcome of all the systems, because it inherits the defects of all of them. You inherit the defect of compound interest, which enriches the bankers, and you inherit the defect of collectivism, which groups human beings in such a way that individual merit doesn't seem to really matter anymore. And so it becomes quite odious, actually, quite disturbing, the whole thing, the whole enterprise. And therefore, the mechanisms of control are considered by the controllers and by the puppets they present to govern us. Anything they do is considered to be copacetic, in a sense. Anything they do is considered okay. Because at the end of the day, in their mind, the alternative is chaos. And they believe that human beings can't live freely and independently. And this, of course, pivots off the entire notion of social philosophy, which really begins with the French. It's one of their contributions to the Western canon. And I think this was like the 17th century that Hobbes and Rousseau existed. This is pretty elementary stuff. I mean, if you even, I think even, I know that in Canada, even in high school, we took a look at this stuff, but I'll get you the details here, when exactly this all happened. There we go. And I think it was, not quite sure. Let's just take a look. I don't want to restore pages. When did Hobbes and Rousseau live? Um, so Thomas Hobbes was an Englishman, and he lived from 1588 to 1679. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau lived from 1712 to 1778. Well, Thomas Hobbes lived a good life, eh? 79 and 12 is like 91. 1588 to 1679. Holy cow, man. That's like 91 going on 92, and that's like in the 1600s. That is amazing. What a long life. The notion of a state of nature was an essential element of the social contract theories of the English philosophers Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. And Locke was 1632 and set to 1704. And the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now Hobbes, I think it was Hobbes. What was the general social theory of Thomas Hobbes as it pertained to liberty and mankind? So Thomas Hobbes' social theory, outlined in his Leviathan, posits, clear reference to the Abrahamic scriptures there, which is always disturbing. Outlined in his Leviathan, posits that in a state of nature, individuals are driven by self-interest and live in a constant state of war, lacking security and a clear sense of right and wrong. To escape this chaotic state, individuals enter into a social contract, surrendering their liberty to a sovereign power to ensure their own protection and safety. So we can't take care of ourselves. And it's not like conflict did. All you got to do is watch Mel Gibson's Apocalypto to realize that there was profound conflict even in the tribal peoples of Central and South America, right? So you can't really say he was wrong. So let's do Rousseau. What was the general social theory on liberty and mankind of Jean-Jacques Rousseau? This is important stuff because it's leading up to the whole reason the state gives themselves the liberty to govern the mind, govern mente. Okay? Because, conspiracy theory is it's not really a conspiracy. If you're well studied enough, they've stated clearly on paper everything that they're doing. It's just, in hindsight, it's a little bit odious, I suppose. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau's social theory centered on the idea that individuals are naturally good but corrupted by society and its institutions. So which one do you think I fall onto? I think by the way, for those of you who've read God is an Economist, you'll notice that one of the toning quotes at the beginning, or the toning quote at the beginning, is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And it goes, the first person who, having fenced a plot of land and took it into his head to say, "This is mine," and found people simple enough to believe him, was the true founder of civil society. And if you've read God as an Economist, then you understand the toning quote. What else? So Rousseau argued for a social contract where individuals surrender some rights to a collective general will in exchange for protection and civil liberty. This theory aimed to establish a legitimate government that embodies the collective interests of the people, fostering a more just and equitable society. Well, the thing is, when you contemplate these social philosophers from 300, 350, 400 years ago, you have to wonder what they would think if they had lived to the 21st century. Because they may have lived in a time where there were marauding gangs and brigands on the highway interrupting commerce of, guarded coaches. So generally wealth was moved by guarded or secured coach, and they did move wealth around in the 1600s and the 1700s in Europe. And they would just put like a bunch of gold in a chest, put the chest into a wagon, and send out a bunch of the king's guards with the wagon and go on like a 2 or a 3 week journey to wherever the gold was being delivered. So there was a bit of social chaos and stuff like that. There were brigands, and remember, I mean, this is living in a time where there was absolutely no surveillance of any kind whatsoever, right? So, I mean, if you met someone on an open road somewhere and you killed them, what are your chances of getting caught, right? And so this begins the idea of a social contract, or why we surrender our rights to the state and what the duty of the state is. Now, were any social philosopher to live today, they would probably, I think both Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau would really enjoy The Light of Darkness, A Warrior's Tale for Our Time. Because the time we live in is one in which the entire structure or construct of society and its contracts are playing out in such a way that the chief villain is the state. And it would have been interesting for both Hobbes and Rousseau to see it come to this. Okay? Now, we could say that they were very naive. You know, a lot of the generational thinkers are quite naive, eh? I mean, in context to what we discuss on the Talamanca Review. And it's true even today. I mean, Jordan Peterson is a profoundly naive man. He's never once, well, actually, he is venturing into a little bit of the satanic underworld and stuff, but he doesn't see it creeping right up into Israel and the Mossad and Washington and Pizzagate and stuff like this. That's naivete. And it's a naivete we don't often acknowledge because these people seem so worldly. You know, oh, how could he be naive, Bruce? Well, you know, the man is very well literate on some of the greatest horrors of the last 150 years. I believe one of his areas of expertise as a psychologist and I guess you could say a theorist on social psychology, meaning the psychology of groups and the psychology of evil, is something Jordan Peterson gets into. I mean, the Bolshevik Revolution is one of those things that he's an expert on. And he's looked at it to the point of self-torture because it's a very disturbing thing to study, the Bolshevik Revolution, what the Bolsheviks did to the population. For those of you who've read Gulag Archipelago, you know what I'm talking about. So in one sense, you can't say Jordan Peterson is naive, but in another sense, yes, he is naive. Okay? He's very naive, actually. And his naivete is massively being capitalized upon now by certain dubious forces on this planet. And what you see today, what's true for today, is also true for yesterday. Do you understand? So I think Rousseau and Hobbes were the naive intellectuals of their day. And most public intellectuals are useful idiots. I don't care how intelligent they appear. Okay? And here, let's name a few. Well, certainly Richard Dawkins is a useful idiot. He's pushing forward an idea that he doesn't really understand. He literally doesn't have the consciousness to have an opinion on atheism. Okay? There's one example. Christopher Hitchens would be another example. Another useful idiot. Who do we have in the 70s and 80s and things like, well, the writers of the 80s. You know, like John Updike was a useful idiot. Margaret Atwood, still living today. She's a useful idiot. Okay? Now, who is this guy, Bruce MacDonald, calling one of the most celebrated English language literary figures of the last 50 years? Well, she published Handmaid's Tale in 85. Last 40 years. One of the most celebrated female literary figures of the last 40 years. And Bruce MacDonald on the Talamanca Review has the audacity to call her a useful idiot. Yeah, she's a useful idiot. She moved forward the agenda of feminism, second wave feminism, third wave feminism, antipathy between men and women, fracturing of the family. And by the way, she owns all of that karmically. If you want to see a living example of a Faustian bargain, look no further than Margaret Atwood, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? And if you don't read and you don't know who she is from reading, if you're Canadian, you know who she is, okay? But if you don't read, well, she's the dark imagination behind The Handmaid's Tale, now in series, I think it's in season 6 on Hulu television. Useful idiot, okay? If you want to read real literature and real art, I would say Alice Munro and Margaret Laurence are two extraordinary female literary figures of the 20th century. The Stone Angel by Margaret Laurence is one of my favorite Canadian novels, okay? I'd say Robertson Davies was a phenomenal writer, and Fifth Business is one of my favorite novels of all time. I'm getting too Canadian. You Americans, I've just lost you. Everyone in their 50s, 60s, and 70s from Canada watching this podcast now is going, yay, because these are the novels we study in high school in Canada. So the simple reality, when you start to see the world through the lens I'm creating for you, and I'm going to get to that in Reality is Imagination. Imagination is reality, or the reality of imagination. I am going to get to that for you. I always do these long-winded intros now, but I don't know. I just, something comes over me, a spirit, and I just go with it, right? So that's what I'm doing now. But this concept of the useful idiot is very important to the hidden controllers, okay? And they kind of put little breadcrumbs out to intellectually lead these spiritually vacated people to the witch's gingerbread house in the woods, okay? And they make their Faustian bargain. They make a bit of money, they become famous, and they become a celebrated intellectual, never once cluing into the fact that they've been completely used. And as I said, what's true for today is true for yesterday. Now, I believe we're coming to a point now where this is going to stop, where the general consciousness of humanity is going to reach a point where they just can't do these things anymore. So I guess we'll call that my intro. And now we'll move on to the Reality of Imagination Part 2. But really, we've been talking about it all along. But here we go.
Now, you are a legend in the literary world, of course, the author of the best-selling book, The Handmaid's Tale. And it tells of a near-future patriarchal society called Gilead, in which the rights of women have been virtually erased. The handmaids are women forced to give birth to the babies of the ruling class. And you released it in 1985. And I read that the events in the book came from actual real-life events.
Everything.
Everything?
Everything. Well, I didn't want people saying, you're certainly a twisted, weird person.
Yeah.
Yeah. So instead I wanted to be able to say, I made nothing up. I just relocated it to Cambridge, Massachusetts, where they were not pleased at first.
Well, but where were women being forced to have children?
Which century would you like to...
Yeah.
Which century would you like to visit? Which country would you like to visit? Which state in the United States would you now like to visit?
Which was it in the United States? When was it in the United States?
Well, any time before Roe versus Wade.
Oh, I see.
So, and now, since they're rolling back those rights and diminishing them so much, you're approaching a state in which women are essentially being conscripted or drafted the way you would be conscripted or drafted into the army. And my view on that is, if you want to do this, if you want the state to claim ownership of women's bodies, you should pay. So if somebody is drafted into the army, they get their food, their lodging, their clothing, their medical, all of that covered. So if you want to do that to women, you should pay for it. Don't you agree?
Something's got to be done. Some remuneration if you're forced to give birth to some child that you don't.
Well, I would say a lot of remuneration.
Well, some people say they should pay women for just the housework that we all do, with raising children, cleaning the house, everything else we do. We don't get paid a dime for that.
Well, I think it's a little bit different when it's your entire body that's being taken over.
Well, recently in this country and in other places around the world, we've seen attempts to severely limit people's rights, as you've just mentioned. In your view, do you think we're moving towards Gilead?
Some places are, and some places are moving in the other direction. For instance, Ireland just took a step away from it. So you have countries where women have never had those rights. You have other countries where they've had them and they're being taken away. And what you can say about every totalitarian government, whatever their reason of being they say they have, whatever their ideology, one thing they always do is roll back women's rights.
Right.
Every single one of them. So it is a symptom and also a result of going further towards an autocratic, authoritarian, totalitarian government.
So there's good old Peg herself. I met her once at a book launch, and I got her to sign a copy of one of her books, a book of essays. But I knew her daughter too, Margaret Atwood's daughter. Yeah, I got around a little bit in the Canadian literary world, but it was mainly there weren't many guys. And when I say guys, I mean straight white men. It was all women, lesbians, and gay men. That was the literary scene. Those were the ones getting the grant money, and those were the ones steering the whole show. And Peg, that's what her friends call her, Margaret Atwood. Her friends call her Peg, short for Margaret. Peg was the belle of the ball, man. She still is in many ways, even in her 80s. And a little bit of a bitter pill for me as a writer, but, I'll live. All right, so let's just quickly recap, okay? Anything dreamed is real. Anything that is dreamed can become real. Grasping at the unreal is therefore normal human behavior. Taking control of imagination is taking control of reality. Reality we know not to be ours, but we know it's holding something back from us, or perhaps we haven't learned to ask for it. Longing forms questions. So then we know we're not whole because where there's fear, there's want. And want is suffering. Creation longs for us and we long for creation. Therefore, longing is natural and creation too is suffering because creation too is growing. Okay? That's about where we left off in part 1 of the reality of imagination. So, longing is the reason of imagination and the reason for imagination. Okay? So, longing is, of course, not any kind of and there's absolutely no reason in imagination because a thing that cannot see beyond itself cannot reason. The whole point of reason is posited on a subject-object relationship. I'm me. This is the external set of circumstances. I'm going to apply reason to the circumstance. Well, imagination is a self-contained reality. There's no object to step out of imagination. So there can be no reason in imagination. The faculty of reasoning doesn't exist in imagination in its purest form. Okay? But longing is the reason of and for imagination. And what I mean by that is when we want something and we're not quite sure what it is we want, like, those of you who've been mothers, when a baby's crying, is he teething? Is she teething? Is she hungry? Does he or she need their nappy changed? There's a list of things you go through as a mother, and it's usually one of those things. And if it's not, and the baby doesn't stop crying, what do? You go to the pediatrician, or you go to the emergency room, right? Well, when we have a longing or a want that we can't quite understand in ourselves, we can't find it in the world, we're not sure what we want, we call that a longing. Let me just get a proper definition of this, okay, as I'm wont to do. Longing definition. It's a noun, even in the ing format, okay? That's interesting because...
What's the definition of longing? A yearning desire.
Thank you, Google. Because generally when you see ing on something, it's a gerund, which is a passive noun. The noun is not active, So it's a yearning desire. Miranda felt a wistful longing for the old days. It's also an adjective. And having or showing a yearning desire, having longing eyes, meaning desirous, but I don't like that. So let's go with the first definition, and this is Oxford Languages. I'm okay with that too. So let's stay with Oxford Languages. So it's a great desire. But when you have a desire, so if you want ice cream, it's a craving. Okay? So I have a craving for ice cream. I have a craving for chocolate. I have a craving for my vape. That'll do it. You could say that I have a craving for intimacy, But when you have a longing, when you're longing for something, if you don't know what it is that you're longing for, and you're having emotional states that you can't resolve, you don't know what they are, this is what activates the imagination, okay? And it generally, I'm speaking from a spiritual perspective now. So the longing for a knowledge of the creation and the creator, a greater identity in your existence than just your physical shell. That's a longing. So most real longings are rooted in spiritual desires, and spiritual desires are very difficult to define when they first emerge. And it varies depending on the kind of society you live in. Okay? So the kind of society we live in now in 2025 is not one where I suppose you could say that spiritual longings are answered. There's a lot of religious services and spiritual services moving in to the Western economy. There's all the medicine retreats coming in to Costa Rica that I tell you guys about all the time. But generally, what I'm getting at here is that a longing is an ambiguous desire. Okay, you're not quite sure what it is. And so we enact the imagination. So this is what I mean when I say longing is the reason of and the reason for imagination. But contradictorily, ironically, there's absolutely no reason in imagination. Reason in the philosophical sense. Let us be reasonable. Okay? Massive play on words there. You can see my language and all of those sorts of things at play there. Okay? So a thing that can't see beyond itself cannot reason. And so the imagination can't see beyond itself, so it can't reason. I've already explained that, right? And the imagination is almost always brought to life by what we want. Okay? That is when the imagination is beginning from the physical existence. It's not universal. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but when you're coming from the biology is mainly what I mean here, okay? So longing is the spirit, the life-giving force of imagination. Longing is the life-giving force of imagination. And it's important for us to consider longing in both its nature and purpose. It leads us to an imagination that can reason. And this is the doorway to the universe. Okay? So I just contradicted myself. I say there's no reason in the imagination, but as you spiritually develop, as you begin to work with your imagination, what comes in? The object imagination, the awakened imagination. And then once you have this awakened imagination, what do you have? You have objectivity in your interior life. I hope you folks are getting this, because this is the whole thing explained in the simplest possible language, and language that, for the most part, originates in the West. Okay? And this is important too, that it originates in the West. Okay? So it leads us to an imagination that can reason, and this is the doorway to the universe. And then the universe, when we leave the universe, is the doorway to God, the creator, the maintainer of all the holograms, all the sheaths within the hologram, and the creator and sustainer of all that, and destroyer simultaneously. The destructive energies are part of God as well, right? This is part of the whole reimagined notion of the devil that I covered in The Devil in Us. So, and then you go beyond it all. You go beyond even the universe. And that is not an imaginative journey. That is a soul journey. That can't be, the imagination is like the rocket booster that drops off after you're out of the Earth's orbit. You know, when rockets go into space, they drop the weight of that rocket component, and the fuel has been depleted. It served its purpose. You let go of it, and the momentum of the rocket in the vacuum of space, plus minor thrusters that are still attached to the rocket to steer it, stop it, turn it around, and redirect it toward re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere, will take care of all the movement you need once the initial thrust is gone. So the imagination is that booster rocket that gets you out of the atmosphere of the human experience. That's how I would put it, okay? Now we're going to look at the number one thing that the imagination is obsessed with, okay? Now, I want to spin that. So in our traditional religious teachings, we talk about sin, okay? I don't believe in sin per se, okay? And I don't believe you go to hell for sin. I think it's ridiculous. I don't care what the Christians say. There are other reasons you go to hell. Extreme cruelty, a very negative vibration, things like this. But in a sense, you're allowed to sin, and those sins will be returned to you, and you will experience receiving the sins that you inflicted upon other. And sins are transgression of equality, transgressions of the natural equilibrium here, okay? And so if you give them, you have to take them. That's the rule. That's the causal rule. And then when you've had enough and you don't like it being done to you, that's how you learn not to do it to other people anymore, okay? You know what your mom and dad say when you're growing up? The only thing a bully understands is a good beating. That's the law of cause and effect right there. Perfectly explained by a loving parent. So, now, a man dreams a woman because he must, okay? So you have to ask the question, what is the distinction between wanting and longing? Okay, so longing is something that you want that you don't necessarily need per se, and or it's a vacancy in you. Wanting is something else. It can be a craving, and as I said, it can be ice cream. It can be anything really. Okay, it's something a little bit different. Now, a man wants a woman. So there's this biological consciousness can influence our imaginations, okay? Huge. I mean, the 20th century is basically a living example about that. 90% of the advertising media that you see or that we see, it plays upon our biological imagination. Whether it be, if you're selling to men, they use sex appeal. They use women. If they're selling to women, they sell the power of sex appeal so you can have power over men. Okay? But all of this imaginative, these, let's call them fantasies, all of these fantasies, and fantasies are a form of derelict imagination. Fantasy is derelict imagination, okay? All of these fantasies are basically our normal social consciousness now for the last 50 years, from 1975 to 2025. It's been non-stop nonsense. Non-stop attack upon the biological imagination. I personally think it should be illegal. I really do. I think it should absolutely be illegal. I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here, okay? If you think about this long enough, you will come to serious questions about whether or not Muhammad was actually someone laying down a tract of wisdom for people to get through an era that was to come, but that could not be seen in the time of Muhammad. And here I'm talking about the chastity of women, the preservation of the family, the preservation of family values, the burqa. In many ways, Islam is the anti-feminine society. It's true. It's the anti-Margaret Atwood society. It's the anti-Handmaid's Tale message. But when you look at it, and I'm not saying either side is right here. I'm just trying to give you a wider perspective, okay? That's all I'm trying to do here. But when you look at it honestly, and I always sum it up in one question. You're the father of a 19-year-old daughter who's very, very beautiful. If she can't manage her beauty and not abuse it as a power, and, or what am I trying to say here? Oh, let me get right to it. If you're the father or the mother of a 19-year-old daughter, would you, if you had a choice, would you, one of these two things is going to happen. She's going to end up on OnlyFans, or she's going to end up in a burqa. Okay? I'll bet you 95 to 99% of men would say, I would choose, if I knew for certain she was going to end up on OnlyFans doing sex videos with men to make money and publicizing those videos to anyone who paid, and or become an Islamic woman and wear a burqa, the man would probably say the burqa. Now, a significant portion of women, probably over 50% now, would view that beautiful young woman as simply capitalizing on the equity God gave her, which is her physical beauty, her great body, and her sex appeal. Okay? But the point is, it's all rooted in biological imagination. Now think about this, because once you crack this as a thought structure, and once you begin to contemplate this, you will begin to understand the trouble we're in, and why I characterize Margaret Atwood as a useful idiot, and not only a useful idiot at one of the most critical points in the evolution of the negative agenda on this planet. Now, she would never see herself that way. And she would probably say, well, I don't advocate women sell themselves sexually on OnlyFans, but it would be better than Gilead. It would be better than forced procreation. Okay? And that's a tough thing to say. Okay? That's a very, very tough thing to say. But when you look at the whole evolution of pornography and the commodification of women, you can only come to one conclusion. And that Western society, its laws, its government, its courts, its judges, its police, have all become pimps. They're pimps. A black man does this on the street with 10 ladies he sells in Detroit, he gets thrown in the jail for living off of the avails, even though he provides a legitimate service to those women. He keeps them protected. He makes sure that no man beats the shit out of them or doesn't pay them. And the women are going to do what they're going to do anyways. So why not have the protection of a man and work that out that way? I don't think it's a good idea for a woman to have a pimp. I don't think it's a good idea for a man to live off the avails of a woman. My question to you is, at this point in our human history, what is the difference between the government, the courts, and the police and the pimp in Detroit? You know, the Gary Oldman character in True Romance. What's the difference? It's an excellent question when you think about it.
You want something?
Yeah, you Drexel.
No, man, I'm Marty.
I want to talk to Drexel.
What the fuck you want to talk to him about?
What's about Alabama?
He was asking about Alabama.
Where the fuck is that bitch?
She's with me.
Who the fuck are you?
I'm her husband.
Well, that makes us practically related. Grab a seat, boy. Grab yourself an egg roll. We got everything here from a little eye Joe to damned if I know.
No thanks.
No thanks? What that mean? I think you're too scared to be eaten. Let's see. We're sitting down here, ready to negotiate. You've already given up your shit. I'm still a mystery to you. But I know exactly where your white ass is coming from. See, if I ask if you want some dinner, and you grab the egg roll and start to try down, I say to myself, this motherfucker, he's carrying on like he ain't got a care in the world, and who knows? Maybe he don't. Maybe this fool's such a bad motherfucker. He don't got to worry about nothing. He just sit down, watch my motherfucking TV. See? You ain't even sat down yet. And that TV over there, since you've been in the room, is a woman with her breasts is hanging out. You ain't even bothered to look. You just been clocking me. I know I'm pretty, but I ain't as pretty as a couple of titties. Ooh-wee! This shot fierce.
I'm not eating because I'm not hungry. I'm not sitting because I'm not saying I ain't looking at the movie because I already seen it 7 years ago. It's the Mac. Max Julian, Carol Speed, and Richard Pryor. I ain't scared of you, I just don't like you. And that envelope right there, that's some payoff money. Alabama's moving on to some greener pastures. We're not negotiating. I don't like to barter. What's in that envelope right there is for my peace of mind. My peace of mind is worth that much, not 1 penny more.
See? Marty, you know what we got here? Motherfucking Charlie Bronson. Mr. Majestic. Look at here, Charlie. None of this bullshit is necessary. I don't got no hold over Alabama. I just trying to lend a girl a helping hand.
So a little bit of Drexel there from True Romance. Great movie, by the way, if you haven't seen it. Tony Scott directed it. Ridley Scott's brother, now dead. I believe he was a suicide, jumped off a bridge. Horrible life, that Hollywood, right? But it was written by Quentin Tarantino. I think it's one of the best scripts he ever wrote because it's just a simple, straight, linear story. It's actually a love story in its own way, and it might be one of, if not the best thing Quentin Tarantino's ever written. But let's finish up Reality of Imagination Part 2. We got kind of bogged down. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say, because I don't want to be a male chauvinist, okay? But at the same time, I want to speak truth. I'm going into the last quarter of my life. I'm almost 60 years old, and I don't want to tell any lies to the coming generations, and I don't want to tell any lies to myself anymore. We totally fucked up with this sex thing, and we got gamed. And it's so deep in our consciousness now, it's unbelievable. It's everywhere. It sells cars, it sells computers, it sells vacations, it sells everything, okay? Everything. And it's an attack on the biology and the imagination that goes with biology. So what happens to people when they get addicted to porn or addicted to sex, quite frankly, and I think my stepson is addicted to sex. I mean, he can be with, I'm not going to get into it. I shouldn't talk about family on the podcast, but anything that's biological, you can get addicted to, right? Anything that's chemical. You can get addicted to tobacco, you can get addicted to alcohol, you can get addicted to drugs. And sex is a chemical process. There's a chemical release. There's a fluid release by both the female and the male. Okay? So it's chemical, it's biological, and you can get addicted to it. I think it should be illegal. And I don't see the restatement of common moral values in society as a bad thing. In fact, I'll go so far as to say that I actually stand with the Christians on this. I think we should start shaming women who flaunt their sexuality too much, okay? And when I say too much, I mean dress like a whore, okay? Please, don't bite my head off, okay? Do not bite my head off. I'm not trying to sound like a caveman. Again, female beauty is something else, okay? Beauty inspires and elevates us. And the beauty of a woman could in the past could be the defining energy of a man's life in terms of trying to live up to that beauty, the beauty of a woman, both internal and external. That would be a good relationship. That would be a good marriage. Okay? Men always want to pay back the debt of women bringing beauty into their lives. And it's both their physical beauty in their face, their eyes, and in the beauty of how they care for people, how they raise children. And I know I'm sounding like a caveman, and I'm not trying to, okay? I mean, if you're a female lawyer and you listen to me, good on you, okay? Good on you. But I got to say, even though I spent a lot of time trashing Jordan Peterson on this podcast, in this regard, he's right, okay? Even a stopped clock is right twice a day, okay? And he is right that you have to understand what we really are and what's really going to make us happy, okay? Now, the male has been hijacked by his imagination. So what happens is you get these images in your mind and they start to become almost cyclic in the sense that it's almost like the cyclic nature of a nicotine addiction. So a person who's been smoking for a decade or so, they're going to want a cigarette about every 45 minutes, every hour to replace the nicotine in their bloodstream because they need a certain flow of nicotine in their bloodstream. Okay? And imagistically, when you get all of these images of female sexuality in your imagination, when the normal impulse for sex in your body acts up, it'll awaken those images in your imagination. And then the imagination will affect your physiology and you'll become erect, you'll become engorged. And in a normal relationship, the sexual impulse, depending on age, but it might come about, every few days or so. But in this modern age we live in, like take for example the chronic masturbator Louis C.K., the stand-up comic. Okay, he once said in an episode of his TV show, sitting in a diner with his comedian friends, they went around the table, how many times a day do you masturbate? And the average number was 8. 8. Now, if you were to get in a time machine and go back to the 1800s and tell them men will masturbate 8 times a day in the 21st century, they will say, how in the fuck could they even do that? Where do they get the energy? What you see, and you want to know how they harvest our energy. Okay, that's Alux harvesting as well. That's enough for tonight. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review, the reality of imagination, part 2. There will be another part.